The Galactic Council chamber was a grand structure, built to accommodate the representatives of hundreds of species across the known universe. Towering crystalline walls reflected the soft glow of artificial starlight, and hovering data screens displayed ongoing discussions in a multitude of languages. In the center of the West Hall sat the circular council table, where the most influential civilizations gathered to decide the fate of the galaxy. Among them, and noticed by most, was the human delegation. Dressed in simple diplomatic robes, they lacked the imposing stature of the armored warlords or the regal aura of the high ministers. Their expressions were calm, almost passive, as if they were content to merely observe rather than command attention. Ambassador Reynolds, the leader of the Terran delegation, listened with quiet patience as a diplomat took the floor. His shimmering golden robes and elongated features gave him an air of superiority, which he clearly embraced. With a condescending smirk, he waved a clawed hand toward the human representatives. And then, of course, there are the Terrans, he mused, his voice smooth and dripping with mockery. Adaptable, yes. Resilient? Certainly. But ultimately fragile. No empire, no real military presence, just traders, diplomats, and explorers. It is admirable, in a way, how they have survived without true power. His words were met with scattered chuckles from various representatives, particularly those of the Dominion, whose history with humanity had been mostly skirmishes, at least, according to official records. Reynolds merely smiled, offering no argument, no rebuttal. She folded her hands neatly before her posture utterly relaxed. The galaxy had long believed humans to be a minor species, when that succeeded not through strength, but through clever negotiation and sheer luck. That was the perception they had carefully cultivated for centuries. There was no need to challenge it now. Not yet. A war chief leaned forward, his thick, armored exoskeleton creaking with the movement. His mandibles clicked thoughtfully before he spoke. The humans have survived because they do not provoke, he said. They do not expand aggressively. They know their limits. He turned his gaze toward Reynolds, expecting some kind of acknowledgement. Instead, she simply tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. The conversation shifted to matters of trade disputes and border conflicts, leaving humanity largely ignored, as they always were. The Council was more concerned with the ongoing tensions between the Dominion and the Syndicate, whose recent clashes had threatened interstellar stability. Humanity was, at best, a footnote in these discussions. Reynolds, however, was watching, listening, taking note of the way these species viewed her people, the way they dismissed the Terran systems as little more than a minor coalition. It was the same mistake they had been making for generations. And while humanity remained outwardly unassuming, the truth was far different. Far beyond the council chamber, deep in the void where no alien eyes could see, fleets existed that no one in this room could imagine. Fleets built not for conquest, but for defense so absolute that no invasion could ever threaten Earth or its colonies. Soldiers trained in secret, their capabilities far beyond anything the council's warlords had ever encountered. Technologies kept hidden, advancements decades, perhaps even centuries, ahead of the known galactic standard. For years, humanity had carefully manipulated its image. They had allowed their military engagements to appear limited, their technology to seem unimpressive, their potential underestimated. They had let the major powers believe that they were a species of diplomats and merchants, too weak to challenge the galactic superpowers. It had worked flawlessly. Reynolds' earpiece gave a brief pulse, a silent message relayed directly to her. A minor skirmish had occurred on the border of Terran's peace. A Dominion fleet had attempted to raid a human colony, expecting an easy victory. But instead, their forces had been eradicated within hours, wiped from existence without a single human casualty. The official report would label it as a mishap, an unfortunate accident that resulted in heavy Dominion losses due to unknown complications. The Council would believe it. They always did. As the discussions continued, Reynolds allowed herself a small, knowing smile. Let them believe humanity was weak. Let them laugh at their perceived fragility. When they, the galaxy, would learn the truth. But not today. The Dominion war fleet loomed over the quiet human colony of Epsilon Prime, its massive warships casting long shadows over the pristine surface below. The attack had been swift and unprovoked, a show of force meant to remind humanity of its supposed place in the galactic aerodon. From the bridge of the Dominion flagship, High Warlord observed the destruction with satisfaction. The colony's aerorbiter defenses had been neutralized within minutes, their meager resistance almost laughable. Small fires burned across the settlement, and Dominion soldiers moved through the streets, rounding up any surviving humans. It was over. Or so they thought. Turned as his, a hulking reptilian officer named, approached. No military response, rumbled, his tone laced with amusement. As expected, their distress signals were intercepted and jammed. They are completely isolated. He handed, displaying footage from the ground. Human civilians huddled together, fear evident in their eyes. A few stood defiantly, but without weapons. They were no threat. Sneered. Pathetic. The council overestimates them. This was barely a challenge. He turned his gaze to the sky, watching for any sign of retaliation. None came. Dominion intelligence had always painted humanity as weak, their military as outdated, their technology primitive compared to the great powers of the galaxy. This attack would serve as proof that the Dominion was superior in every way. But then, something changed. A strange, almost imperceptible shift in the air. A deep silence fell over the battlefield, as if the very planet was holding its breath. Stiffened, his predatory instincts flaring. The comms officer suddenly shouted in alarm. "Sir! We have," his words cut off in a burst of static as the ship's primary systems flickered. Lights dimmed, control panels sputtered, and suddenly, the massive Dominion fleet, so powerful, so dominant, was blind. On the surface, the human captives stopped trembling. A few exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from fear to something else. Anticipation. Some even smiled. And then, the first explosion tore through the sky. A Dominion cruiser, one of the largest in the fleet, erupted in a violent blaze, splitting in half before plummeting toward the ground. The warships around it scrambled to react, their weapons priming, but their targeting systems had been hijacked. Another explosion followed. And another. Within seconds, the Dominion fleet was in chaos, burning against the ward like dying embers. Heart pounded as he barked aerodons, but nothing responded. Their advanced systems, their powerful war machines, none of them worked. "How?" he snarled, gripping the edge of the command console. "Where is the attack coming from?" The answer arrived in the form of sleek, black ships cutting through the darkness like silent predators. No insignia, no markings, just the glint of cold matter. They moved too fast for Dominion weapons to track, weaving through the debris of the broken fleet with unnatural precision. Then came the transmissions. Not threats. Not ultimatums. Just laughter. Human laughter, cold and knowing, filtering through the Dominion calm channels like a whisper of death. On the ground, the unarmed civilians moved. In an instant, they shed their disguises, hidden weapons emerging from seemingly nowhere. Blades, firearms, and technology the Dominion had never seen. The captors became the captives as human operatives moved with deadly efficiency, eliminating the bewildered Dominion soldiers with single, precise strikes. Still on the bridge, could only watch in horror as the battlefield reversed. "This was a trap," he choked out. "They let us come." Mind reeled. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't desperation. This was control. Humanity had let them think they were weak. They had lured them in, let them strike first, only to reveal, too late, that the Dominion had never been the hunter. "They were waiting for us," realized aloud. The realization settled over him like a weight too heavy to bear. The Dominion had always assumed that humans were fragile because they had never fought them at full strength. But what if that was intentional? What if humanity had spent centuries hiding its true power, misleading the galaxy into believing it was something it wasn't? And what if, for the first time, they had decided to stop pretending? The answer came in the form of a final transmission, broadcast across every Dominion ship in the fleet. A single human voice, calm and collected, speaking as their forces decimated what was left of the invaders. You wanted to see our true strength. The voice paused. Then, with eerie amusement, it added, now you have. The War Council chamber aboard the Dominion dreadnought was eerily silent. High Warlord stood motionless at the center of the vast, circular room, his clawed hands resting on the stone table that had seen countless war campaigns planned and executed. Around him, the most powerful military minds of the Dominion Empire sat, their cybernetic eyes flickering with uncertainty as they stared at the massive holographic display hovering above them. The footage replayed on an endless loop, the destruction of the fleet, the ambush on the ground, the brutal efficiency with which the humans had dismantled an invasion force that was supposed to be unstoppable. One of the younger generals finally broke the silence, his voice hoarse. This has to be some kind of deception. A trick. His scaled fingers tightened around the armrest of his chair. The humans cannot possibly be this powerful. Didn't respond immediately. He only watched, golden eyes locked onto the frozen image of the battlefield's aftermath. Dominion soldiers lay dead, their weapons untouched. Ships burned, their hulls sliced apart with surgical precision. And the humans, they stood unscathed, unfazed, as if the entire engagement had been nothing more than an exercise. He turned his gaze to the other warlords. You still believe in the intelligence reports? His voice was quiet, but it carried an undeniable edge. You still believe that humanity is weak? The other warlords shifted uneasily, their ornate armor glinting under the red glow of the holographic projections. One of the olden commandants growled. We underestimated them. That much is clear. But this does not mean they are superior to us. He gestured sharply at the display. They had the element of surprise. They used underhanded tactics, deception, ambushes. We can adjust, counter their methods, and strike back with full force. Claws scraped against the stone table. You still do not understand. He gestured toward the image of a human operative standing over the corpse of a Dominion warrior, his expression unreadable. We assumed they were fragile. We assumed they were technologically inferior. But what if we were wrong about all of it? His voice dropped lower. What if this was them holding back? A deep, uneasy silence settled over the War Council. Even confident posture wavered. Leaned forward. We have always seen them as an anomaly. A species that should not have risen to prominence, yet somehow did. We told ourselves that their expansion into the stars was luck, that their victories in minor skirmishes were outliers, that their defiance was the foolishness of a young race that had not yet been crushed under the weight of the galactic aerodon. His claws tapped against the table. And yet, here we are. A Dominion war fleet, one of our finest, completely eradicated. And not in prolonged war. Not in a battle of attrition. It was over before we even understood what was happening. Breathing grew shallow. Then what are you saying? Exhaled slowly, as if finally putting words to a truth he had been afraid to admit. I am saying that humanity may not be the weaklings we believed them to be. I am saying that they may have allowed us to think that. He pointed to the screen, where a human operative was seen calmly walking through the wreckage of a Dominion base, his weapon lowered, his body language almost casual. This was not the response of a desperate species fighting for survival. This was control. They were never afraid of us. They never saw us as a threat. The weight of that realization crushed the room into silence once more. Van by van, the warlords' expressions darkened as the implications set in. If what was saying was true, then the War Council had spent years planning their expansion and on false assumptions. They had believed themselves the apex predators of the galaxy. But what if they weren't? A new voice, deep and measured, cut through the quiet. What if we pushed them too far? All heads turned to Warlord, the most senior of them all. His scaled hands were folded in front of him, his piercing gaze locked onto. You say they were holding back. That they let us think we were superior. His cybernetic eye flickered as he studied the battlefield footage. What happens if we force them to stop pretending? No one spoke, because the answer was too horrifying to say aloud. The Dominion had always prided itself on strength. But what if, for the first time in their empire's history, they had encountered something far stronger? What if they had never been the true apex species of the galaxy? What if humanity had been the dominant force all along, merely playing along with the illusion of balance? Straightened. If we escalate, if we challenge them further, we may force them to show us what they truly are. His jaw clenched. And if what we've seen is only a fraction of their capability, then I fear we will not survive to understand the full extent of it. Opened his mouth, as if to protest, but no words came out. The confidence, the arrogance that had fueled the Dominion's conquests for centuries, had been shaken to its core. The warlords sat in heavy silence, watching the last moments of their fallen soldiers play on the screen. They had believed this war would be easy, that humanity would fold beneath their might. Instead, they had walked into a carefully laid trap. Instead, they had been the ones exposed. The bridge of the Dominion flagship was enervingly quiet. The massive observation window displayed the remains of what was once a formidable Dominion fleet, now reduced to drifting wreckage. Flames flickered in the vacuum of space as shattered hulls span aimlessly. The proud banners of the Empire turned and meaningless. High Warlord stood at the center of the bridge, his golden eyes fixed on the devastation, his mind racing with the weight of a truth he could no longer ignore. Behind him, his officers remained motionless, their usual confidence replaced by an unfamiliar silence. They had once believed in their dominance, their technological superiority, their unchallenged rule over the lesser species of the galaxy. But now, they could no longer deny what was painfully obvious. Humanity had never been the prey. It had always been the predator. A beeping alert interrupted the silence as the ship's comms officer hesitated before speaking. High Warlord, we are receiving a transmission from the humans. Every eye on the bridge turned to. He inhaled slowly, his claws flexing against the armrest of his command throne. Put it through. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a single human standing in what appeared to be the command center of one of their warships. And like the Dominion officers, clad in ornate battle regalia, the human was dressed in simple, unassuming fatigues. No elaborate medals, no symbols of status, just a calm, unreadable expression. High Warlord, the human said, his voice disturbingly casual. I assume you're ready to talk. Forced his expression to remain neutral. If you wished to negotiate, you could have done so before slaughtering my fleet. The human tilted his head slightly, as if amused. Negotiate? A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. No, we're not here to negotiate. We're here to give you a choice. The warlords around bristled at the implication, but he raised a clawed hand to silence them. And what choice would that be? The human's expression turned unreadable again. You leave. Now. Take what remains of your forces and vanish from this sector. Never return. Narrowed his eyes. And if we refuse? The human sighed, shaking his head as if he had expected that response. Then we stop pretending. A ripple of unease spread through the bridge. Fingers dug into the armrest. Pretending? The human leaned forward slightly, his gaze sharp and wavering. You think this was a war? This wasn't a war. This was a warning shot. A demonstration. His voice remained calm, but there was something beneath it, something cold. You assumed we were weak because we let you think so. You assumed you were stronger because we never bothered to correct you. Mind raced. He had seen the battlefield reports, the way humans fought, not with brute force, not with reckless aggression, but with calculated precision. They never engaged unless they knew they would win. They never lost a battle they chose to fight. And when they did fight, they did so with a cold, methodical efficiency that left no survivors, no lingering threats. If this was what they considered restraint, what would it look like if they truly committed to war? The human continued, his tone unchanging. You've seen what we can do when we're playing nice. Do you really want to see what happens if we stop? The weight of the words settled heavily in the air. No threats. No bluster. Just a simple, terrifying statement of fact. Exhaled slowly. He had spent his entire life fighting, conquering, subjugating lesser species. He had never once imagined a day when his own empire would be backed into a corner. He had never once believed that his people would be the ones faced with extinction. And yet, here he stood. A predator realizing too late that he had wandered into the territory of something far more dangerous. He turned to his officers, seeing the same realization reflected in their faces. They had lost. Not just the battle, but the illusion of their own supremacy. To continue this war would not lead to victory. It would lead to annihilation. Slowly, turned back to the holographic display. He met the human's gaze, forcing his voice to remain steady. We will withdraw. The human nodded, and surprised. Good choice. The transmission cut out, and the bridge was left in silence once more. The weight of the decision pressed down on, heavier than any battle he had ever fought. Without another word, he turned toward his officers. Send the retreat order. Inform all remaining Dominion forces to withdraw from human space immediately. The officers hesitated, but no one argued. They had seen the truth for themselves. As the command was relayed, allowed himself a single moment to stare out at the ruined battlefield once more. Humanity had been underestimated. That was the Dominion's first mistake. Their second mistake had been believing that they were the apex species of the galaxy. Their third mistake was pushing humanity too far. There would not be a fourth.